Good afternoon and good morning to everyone who's joining us from around the world. Welcome to the inaugural Victorian EdTech and Innovation Expo we are delivering in partnership with the State of Victoria. Before we begin formal proceedings, allow me to pause to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and to recognise their continuous and unbroken connection to land, waters and culture across the country. I pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and I personally welcome any Indigenous people with us today. For our international visitors, allow me to briefly explain why we pause for this important acknowledgement. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were the first custodians of the land we call Australia. This relationship has never been broken. We begin our events by acknowledging the unique position of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Australian culture, history and our future. It is my great honour to lead EduGrowth, Australia's EdTech and Innovation Industry Knowledge Hub. Through connection and collaboration, we accelerate Australia's EdTech ecosystem globally. EduGrowth exists because of the vision of our foundation partners, Charles Sturt, Deakin, Griffith, La Trobe and Monash Universities, along with Navitas, founded EduGrowth in 2019. These organisations saw the role that Australia can play in reimagining education in a digital, borderless online world. We have an exciting program ahead of us today. Let's begin by providing special thanks to the State of Victoria and welcome Caroline Harnett from Global Victoria.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Caroline Hartnett and I am from Global Victoria. On behalf of the Victorian Government, I'd like to say how pleased I am to partner with EduGrowth on this amazing initiative. It's great to see people logging in from around the world for our inaugural Victorian Global EdTech and Innovation Expo. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional Aboriginal owners of country throughout Victoria and Tasmania, where I'm beaming in from today. I acknowledge their ongoing connection to this land and pay my respects to their culture and their elders past, present and emerging. So Global Victoria is the trade agency of the Victorian Government. We open the world to Victorian businesses and welcome the business world to Victoria. We do this by building the skills and knowledge of Victorian businesses to grow on the international stage, promoting the state's world-class industry capabilities to international audiences, and leading the nation as the best city in Australia to study in. Our international network of over 20 Victorian Government trade and investment offices located in key export markets can open doors to contacts who can expand your horizons and help make your global ambitions a reality. The Victorian Government has outlined its objective to build Victoria as an EdTech and e-learning hub in its international education strategy. Melbourne, Victoria is a global thought leader in learning and assessment. It is also the centre for Australia's online program management sector and has a strong reputation for delivering high quality international education. Victoria has an exciting and diverse range of education technology companies, some of which you'll see today. The Victorian EdTech sector is thriving and leading Australian education innovation, particularly in administration systems, student management and learning management. As David mentioned, today we're going to hear from some of Victoria's thought leaders who are experts in EdTech and online learning, and also hear from a sample of Victoria's fantastic EdTech companies. It's great to have the opportunity to showcase some of Victoria's companies and EdTech capabilities and online learning capabilities today with you, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Carolyn. Hi everybody, my name's Alyssa Newell and I'm going to be the MC for the event today. Thanks for joining us. Just a little bit about me. I'm a specialist in digital marketing and communications and partner at higher education consulting firm Edified. I work with generally universities across Australia, New Zealand and the UK to help them gain ground quickly in student acquisition and student experience. I've got a conversation between a couple of really well-known and great people in our education sector here, Beverley Oliver and David Bowser. I'm going to have a conversation with David Linke, who we just heard from earlier on. Beverley Oliver is a globally recognised voice on the digital transformation of education. Throughout her career, she's led the thinking on student employability, digital engagement, online teaching and micro-credentialing. Most recently, she led Deakin University's digital transformation agenda as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education, where she was recognised with the university's highest honour as the title of Alfred Deakin Professor. And today, Beverley is a sought-after consultant, speaker and researcher by leading organisations across the world. And she's going to be speaking with David Bowser, who has over 20 years experience in higher education as an academic and as a leading strategy consultant. In 2016, he created Curio Group, which is a collective of advisors, educators and product developers focused on working directly with education institutions to make a difference. And Beverley and David are going to be having a conversation about migrating higher education programs online to engage a new cohort of learners. I'll hand over to you now. And
Thanks very much, Alyssa. Appreciate it. Beverley and David, do you want to turn on your cameras and come and join us on this exciting and interesting panel? I think we have 20 minutes, half an hour to have a conversation about how are we migrating education online, and obviously the current situation of COVID-19 has highlighted the need to deliver education in an online and digital world, which is a really interesting opportunity for us and something that we can think about. Recent research by ADP suggests that maybe there's some resistance or reluctance out there amongst international students who may be thinking about coming to Australia to use an online platform. So I wanted to begin the conversation and maybe even acknowledge and ask the question about maybe everything can't be taught online. Where are the strengths and the weaknesses about online learning? Maybe Beverley, do you want to give us a bit of an insight first?
Thanks, David, and good evening or good morning to everyone who's joined us online. It's great to be able to chat. And there are many people, of course, who are joining us who have all sorts of experience and opinion in this area, but I'll share something from my point of view, which is you're absolutely right, David. Not everything can be taught online, but a lot of learning can be enhanced or augmented by bringing online to the classroom as well. So I think, you know, thinking about what's happened in the last few months, online learning's not new, we know that. We've been doing it for a very long time, particularly in Australia. We've got a great history in distance education. We've got a lot of distance to cover. So it's also about using the affordances of this technology to make the best of any kind of learning. I would say that I think higher education providers, or all education providers now, this might be the flipping point where, in fact, when the chips are down and things get tough, you know, none of us really thought much about a whole pandemic and what life would be like, that actually digital, if you can do your education digitally, you can keep learning. So I think as providers begin to think about opening back up again and going back on campus, which is the language we use, I think it's also time to think about actually investing in online learning, because we know that we're going to be in and out of this situation for some time to come. And that maybe, David, in answer to your question, online learning is going to become the new normal, and getting to campus occasionally is perhaps the way we're going to do it less regularly, if you like. Just going back to your comment about the IDP survey though, I think if we asked people who were thinking of investing in coming to another country to enjoy a campus experience, then no, of course, they're not probably going to be that keen on having what seems to them to be a deficit experience, because it's not what they were hoping for. But I do think, and I'm sure we'll explore during this conversation, that there are many people around the world who are maybe not going to leave their countries, but could learn online with a country like Australia. So I'm happy to follow that up as we unpack this conversation.
That's a really nice segue, David, to think about for a really rich, deep online learning experience. I'm wondering whether you can sort of give a bit of an insight into what you think some of the things that we need to consider and develop to ensure that that experience is rich and rewarding for everyone.
I think that there is broadly, David, a bit of confusion in some cases in consumers around what is online learning and online education and distance learning, and what is a massive online course and what is the experience that you're going to get from it. And everything seems to be bucketed into online learning, or e-learning, as it used to often be called as well, but after distance learning. And I think what we potentially need to get out there is that there are different types of experiences. And what we know is that remote teaching, so effectively recording a seminar or a lecture and someone watching it asynchronously at a different time for an hour, is not a great experience for anyone for a start, but at the same time, it isn't really a great learning experience. And unless, of course, the person who's delivering it, we've got some amazing academics in Australia who do this, deliver incredible face-to-face and even online experiences where they can engage with the students, it is a really tough ask for overseas students to be going and asking for it. To take another tack on it, I don't think it really comes down to certain disciplines that can't be taught or can't be learnt online. I don't think it's really about the discipline. It's more actually about whether the type of learning is going to be, one, authentic, and secondly, is actually going to be able to allow the person to actually learn and embrace and pick up the content, or in particular, the skills. And that's when we get down to skills is where it starts to get particularly hard. And we've been working particularly in health lately, where you'd think to yourself, well, it's really hard for someone to pick up some of the aspects of, say, human anatomy. But what we've learned over the last 20 years with some amazing work that's been done by several universities, including the University of Melbourne on anatomedia, is that people who have trained with anatomedia, as opposed to with a cadaver, a body, actually have a greater knowledge and a greater understanding of human anatomy than the people who just had the cadaver alone, which is quite interesting in its way, in a way.
So can I just break that out? What you're suggesting is if we combine online and face-to-face, blended learning, there we go, is a nice little topic that we like to talk about. You're saying that we could get a richer experience?
I think we can.
Doesn't have to be and or. Doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
I think it can be absolutely both. And I think also what we're seeing, and this is again in the health disciplines, in some of the work that we're doing now, going out into the UK, and I've got them right here because at the moment we're building them, is actually like virtual reality experiences for teaching health, and in particular for teaching nurses and doctors and healthcare professionals around what to do when they get a code blue at a hospital. How do they understand what to do with advanced life support systems? And that can all be trained actually by quickly and immersing someone in the actual experience that they can do online using different types of virtual reality experiences and augmented reality experiences that we never thought was possible previously.
Okay. I just wanted to, just before we move on to thinking about the investment needed to make online learning successful, Beverley, do you think that there's a different type of learner who might come on campus versus online?
Well, we know that already, David, in the Australian context. So the on-campus learner, well, this is what I think is going on anyway, based on the data, the national data. The person who signs up for an on-campus experience is more likely to be a younger domestic student in particular disciplines, most disciplines.
In Australia?
Yeah, this is Australia.
Yep.
And I would be surprised if it was terribly different in other countries. And the other group of people who sign up for the on-campus experience, of course, are the international students, and their visa requirements require them to be on campus. The people who opt for fully online learning, they are generally the domestic students, and they happen to be usually slightly older, definitely with more caring and working responsibilities, possibly part-time. And so we can see in the data, they're really quite a different mix, and they're around particular disciplines. So in Australia, fully online learners tend to be more female than male, and they're studying things like law and education, nursing. You might wonder how we do nursing online, but it is entirely possible. There are lots of people doing nursing online. Master's degrees in business administration, for example, and so on. So they would be some of the bigger groups. So they're really quite different. Whereas, you know, the people who are, and I'm going to use my words carefully, enrolled for a campus experience tend to be the more, the younger ones. And I'll just say one more thing about that. I'm using the term enrolled for the campus experience because in my experience as a former Deputy Vice-Chancellor, just because you enroll for the campus experience doesn't mean you turn up for it regularly. Or you may come to campus, and this is quite serious and not a bad thing. And, you know, my experience, students would come to campus and actually go to the library or sit somewhere in a cafe with their friends and watch the lecture together from the next building. And it's a bit of a mystery as to why, but I guess it's because it's an on-demand issue, isn't it? You can do it from where you want to be and how you want to engage, because you might be sitting there talking to your peers about what's going on or not. And then again, you could be sitting in the lecture theatre and just be on Facebook. So, you know.
It's a nice segue to think about this idea of having this blended environment. And I'll go to you, David, saying, as Beverley just said, she was an ex-DVC and executive in university. But we know that there's lots of Australian universities that have spent substantially on buildings, physical buildings in their environment. And I wonder out loud, and you may not have the data, I wonder out loud whether or not these institutions have been investing comparative sort of numbers into their online teaching and learning experiences, and whether or not their platforms have taken pace with their need to move to this migrated environment.
I think it's a good question, but I don't think anyone actually does know the answer. Possibly one of the Auditor Generals across Australia probably would know, have a rough idea of what the answer is in Australia. But I think unlike Australia is a little bit different, but in other countries, there are completely online universities, such as Southern New Hampshire University in the US, or the Open University in the UK, or in Thailand, there's several I'm starting to learn about recently as well, where there are quite a different type of university experience can be used, and a student can attend it completely online. And I think, as Beverley was saying as well, we know that people doing online undergraduate degrees like nursing and education, etc., do predominantly tend to be women. They also tend to be a little bit older than the younger students coming straight into high school, and they're often actually in outer suburban areas or regional centres. That's particularly for undergraduate degrees. In postgraduate qualifications, it's similar sort of gender split, 50-50 from what we're seeing. But what we also do know is globally now, there are more people studying online for postgraduate education, and there are people studying for face-to-face postgraduate education.
That's Australia, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's actually being found in the US and the UK, exactly the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you,
so I think people are moving
mentioned
in that way.
And you mentioned fully online universities. Do you see universities, Open Universities Australia in that sort of cohort as well?
Well, OUA is a little bit of a different model. It's more of an aggregator of courses from other universities and then providing them online. So it's slightly different in terms of its model, as opposed to a standalone higher education provider that's regulated. So they're slightly different beasts, but I think that there's potentially opportunities for this sort of model globally, where students are looking for something different. And unfortunately, the regulatory system here in Australia has set up universities to be fairly similar and made it fairly hard for them to really specialize and take on different models and different pricing structures and things that we were talking about before that enable us to often compete really well in other markets.
But I guess the interesting thing is, and this may be sort of a nice segue back to you as well, Beverley, is if we have got borderless digital online delivery of education, how does an Australian institution compete on that global scale? And almost linked in there somehow is, you know, the online platforms that universities use, are they internally considered cost centres or profit centres for the university? Are they considered opportunity, or are they considered, I don't know what I'm thinking. I don't know. I'm trying to find a politically nice word to use here. Are they considered a distraction from the main occupation of the university, or are they seen it as an add-on? I'm interested in that thinking pattern that Australian universities have, and then when we start to think about the external market as well.
Well, I'm going to start with the possibility of a fully online Australian university.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I agree with David. You know, OUA is the aggregator, and certain universities put their courses there, and it's like an eBay of learning in a sense. You know, you go one place to find things, and that's good. I think it'll be an interesting idea, and I've often wondered if this might occur. I have no insight into if anyone's thinking of doing it, but it would be very interesting to think about how you would construct a completely online university. And the reason I find it interesting is because, based on my experience at Deakin and Curtin universities, and particularly at Deakin really, which was more recent, no matter how hard you try to be a digital first university, your on-campus legacy is very hard to shake off, you know? So if you started a new university that was digital from day one, and you designed for the kind of living we're doing now, where we're all actually sitting in rooms in our home doing this. So there is no campus in that sense. There are no buildings with people's names on them, and, you know, expensive bricks versus clicks. I think you would come up with quite an interesting model. Now, I guess the edX and FutureLearn and Coursera platforms are kind of trying to be that as well. But again, that's a very campus-based university putting something on a platform. And I think it would be a really interesting experiment. Coming to your question of profit or loss, I'm not quite sure where you're going with that. However,
well, let me share a little bit more. It's interesting that I think when you start to invest in digital transformation, you can either consider it as a cost that has to be incurred, or you can see it as an opportunity to go and develop new revenue and develop new profit, right? And lots of people take the view that expenditure on a digital transformation may be taking away from other parts of it, and therefore it's seen as a cost as opposed to an investment. Maybe that may be the better term.
Well, anyone post-COVID-19 who thinks it's a cost versus an investment. Crazy.
Yeah, all right.
However, you know, no, I'm going to hit this topic straight on because I do think universities need to invest more in clicks than bricks. I'll put it that way. And, you know, going forward, this is the only platform you've got left when the chips are down and life has changed overnight. So I do think, you see, if you invest in your platform, you can reach beyond your geographical boundaries. And, you know, as David knows very well in the Australian system, we have been very geographically bounded. If you're a university in the heart of Sydney, for example, you're bound by the distance and travel modes that your students can use to get to you. However, once you go digital, there really is no border. You can go anywhere in Australia. You can, and Australian universities do enrol students from right across the nation in their online programs. But of course, you can easily go beyond that as well. You've got your own time zone, and then you've got time zones to the left and right. So basically, if you can provide a learning experience which is accessible and affordable, you have a market. And I don't think the Australian higher education system has fully exploited that opportunity yet.
Which is, again, a really nice segue into thinking about sort of market development and beginning that conversation. If we think about the fact that we have 700,000 something students in Australia who are international students, and we start thinking about, well, how do we expand that market? And in simple terms, that 700,000 come from a very small or narrow band of economic capacity in the country where they are. And I wonder whether or not, what models might exist and might be developed going forward, David, do you see around trying to engage a broader, bigger, deeper cohort of students in country and international environments? And I'm conscious, just before while you can ponder that for 1 second, I'll just speak to the audience. By all means, we're starting to get lots of questions coming through, so pop them through Q&A and I'll start curating them and bringing them into the conversation as well. But back to you, David, thinking about how do we expand in these international markets?
I think Australia is ready. We are absolutely ready to be delivering our online learning programs and expertise that we've developed over many years to international markets. Beverley, effectively set up a lot of what Deakin has been doing for many years with Cloud Campus and Deakin Digital, etc., going out there and delivering their courses online. Swinburne Online has been around, I think, now for about 10 years in partnership with OES. RMIT Online, which is a partnership with us and KeyPath, have been doing similarly for around about 3.5 years now. And they've got amazing experiences, incredible learning experiences that are ready to go to international markets. But
they're predominantly domestic students right now, though, David.
Hard. They are absolutely
they're domestic students now.
Correct, but if they're going to access some of those international markets, we haven't quite worked out what does the agent model look like for online experiences. The Australian international education market, you mentioned IDP at the start, and there's a number of other smaller agents, etc., are really the primary source of international students coming onshore into Australia. So if we're able to potentially start thinking slightly differently about how could we either use an agency network or other types of marketing and social marketing, etc., to be able to access a different cohort of students that are able to complete their studies online in another country is one thing. The other part of it is our foundation programs that are built to be able to allow often international students to have 1 year of bridging before they join on campus in Australia, is being able to increasingly deliver those online. And a lot of our UK university now competitors are actually already doing a lot of that in market in Asia now. They're offering their foundation programs at reduced prices and at reduced price points so that they can actually get access and gain access to that student cohort and student load. So I absolutely believe that our universities are ready to do it. And, you know, we would love to help them do so, of course, David.
Did you want to add something in there, Beverley, about accessing learners in a different model offshore?
Yeah, I'd love to. So piggybacking on David's good comments, I think it's time to think differently about how we do it. Agents is one way. Another way is to partner with a university in another country. I'll give you an example. Someone let me know last night that Deacon's joint degree with Coventry University in entrepreneurship is now live on the Future Learn platform. There you go, that was a free ad for them. But the point is, you know, and that took a long time to figure out, and it was something I was working on before I finished. And so I was very pleased to hear this. And, you know, that could be the way of the future, because you've got a Deakin in Melbourne, a Coventry, obviously in Coventry in the UK. You've got two universities who are not competing in the same geographical location, who've got brand recognition, different parts of the world, who've got time zones covered in certain parts of the world. And so when you co-create something with another partner university, you share the costs and you share the revenue. And that's a great deal for a student to get a global experience. One of the motivating factors for that, David, was when I studied the online learners of Deakin in Australia, they're a very homogeneous group. They're basically Australian citizens. They don't engage with international students. So for me, this was a way of, you know, learn online, learn with the world without leaving home. This is a global experience. You can meet people from all around the world. I think it's exciting.
Great idea.
Do you want to add something there, David?
No, I think it's an absolutely fantastic idea. And it also means that through those collaborative experiences that you're able to cover a 24-hour clock. So you can deliver synchronous experiences in different time zones all across the world. And I think that's a fantastic advantage and a great way of going about it.
There's two things I want to talk about in terms of export capability and before we move on to really a really important piece, which is about international education and so forth in a second. And I'm just conscious of time. I wanted to think about, we've talked about universities, we've talked about Australian universities, we've talked about partnerships with international universities. I think this is all exciting stuff. What about partnerships with, for example, EdTech suppliers, or whether those partnerships might end up being with private providers, or they might be completely different delivery models, Beverley? Do you see opportunities that might come about, like, for example, maybe you begin something in your country and then you do a finishing school in Australia, which is an intense, immersive program here. Do you see these models evolving?
Absolutely.
Are they happening now?
Yeah, look, I think any higher education provider, insert university or not, who tries to go it alone these days is not going to make it. It's too complex. So I think first we need to focus on, I'll go right to the heart of the issue here. What employment is the learner going to get or secure from the course that we're going to deliver? And how can we line up a group of partners under the university brand, if that's the credential provider, who's going to make that learning as authentic and authenticated as possible. So I think universities absolutely need the EdTech partnerships. In fact, I'm working with some EdTechs now, and I'm really proud and pleased to say that it's a great sector to work with. And I'm encouraging any EdTech people listening and participating to take heart that I think the universities are going to need you more now than ever. Not because they're no good, they're clearly terrific. However, they're going to need third-party partnerships because the EdTechs are actually led by the graduates of our universities who are creating their own employability and giving us solutions to problems they experience themselves, because the way universities offer education is not perfect. It's not as industry focused as it could be. That's why we need industry at the table first. We need to start with industry and in partnership.
Do you want to extend on to that, David?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think the programs that we're seeing the most increase in student uptake are those where there is true industry engagement, but also creating peer experiences and networking experiences for people to get to understand that new sector. We're currently building a digital transformation master's degree for one university, and it's in partnership with Accenture, who are probably the world's largest digital transformation company. And who better to build it with than an organisation like theirs that lives and breathes this, but also it enables the students to get some networking going with people who are in that firm, get to understand them, almost like in some cases for Accenture, potentially through internships, creates almost an experience for the student where they get to learn actually really what is the job that you could be potentially doing. And similar things exist in other sort of more emerging disciplines around user experience design and product management and all of those sorts of areas, which are becoming increasingly important. What I'd love to see is that now coming into our more, in inverted commas, traditional programs, such as, say, accounting, where, say, you know, CPA Australia or CANS, the Chartered Accountants, and other international accountancy and professional bodies really trying to get themselves more involved in the degree that's leading their profession, and giving more industry-related content, giving more of an experience that embeds in those courses. And that can be more easily done in an online environment because they don't have to come in for a particular class at particular times and all sorts of things, but they can be involved in the actual learning experience and thinking through, again, how do we create those authentic experiences that are going to lead to having real employability skills?
I think career readiness, authentic assessment, and industry connected projects is a whole nother panel. We can do that. I don't think we've got enough time in the remaining 3 minutes we've got left. I did want to take some questions from the audience, and I've got a couple of interesting questions here. The first one, which I think we sort of touched on, but I do want to just to reiterate it again. Australia has a wealth of experience in business and online learning. How do we export that capability to the world? Like, what's the model do you see that might be evolving? And I know, David, this is sort of essentially a core part of the commercial operations of Curio, I guess, in a large extent.
It is, so maybe I should stay silent. Yes, we absolutely have a wealth of knowledge in digital education, and we are recruiting people like gangbusters in Australia in order to build courses and learning experiences for other countries and other universities at the moment. So we are absolutely playing in the export learning, export income space for Victoria, where we're employing people here to effectively work in the UK, Europe, and Asia. And of course, as we all know at the moment, they're doing it completely from their home, in probably somewhere in Melbourne or Victoria at the moment.
Absolutely.
Well. So yeah,
absolutely. I've got a couple. Let me look through here. There is a question here, and maybe you might be best to help us answer this, Beverley, which is it's around what policy settings do we need to put in place to ensure that this external market that we're looking at can grow?
I think we need to go back to well, we've got standards, David. We've got the Higher Education Standards Framework and the regulatory framework. And I think we need to go back and have a good look at that, because my hunch is the people who put that together did a really good job. But that's a few years ago now, and the world has fundamentally changed. So I would like to think that TEXA, the regulator, and the Higher Education Standards Panel in this country have a look through the lens of this reimagined digital first endeavour, very partnered and so on, to see if those particular policy settings really do fit the digital first experience. And along with that, I would add the quality indicators that we use. We've got QUILT, the quality indicators for learning and teaching, graduate employment, and so on. When I have a hard look at those questions, a lot of them really are focused on that. You can see they've come out of a campus experience, you know, what university was like in the 70s. I think we need to have another look.
Just before, I just see Alyssa there. She's going to be wrapping me up any second now, but I do have one final question I do want to ask, and it's a really important question here because it's actually an audience question, and I think I know who has actually asked this question. Do employers value an online degree the same as they would value an on-campus degree, and do they know?
No, they don't know. David, I've jumped in first. I hope that's okay.
No, I don't think they do know, and I completely agree in terms of degrees, but in terms of short courses and what you might call micro-credentials, etc., we've actually got some increasing evidence to the fact that yes, they do. And this is mostly coming through some of the smaller providers like General Assembly, etc., whose business model is effectively to train people up and then push them into into employment. So from that sort of perspective, I would say yes. From a course degree, accredited degree program, don't know.
I think that that's a great point. And I think the other thing is there's lots of Australian EdTech providers and online course providers who are also doing that. So I'm actually going to have to wrap up now because I know Alyssa's now going to be, we're now running 2 minutes behind. So on behalf of everyone, David, thank you so very much for your contribution. Beverley, I appreciate it enormously. Thanks for your time. I'll hand over to Alyssa.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.